So Donald Trump visited Kenosha today, not to meet with the family of the man who's lying paralyzed in a hospital bed after being shot in the back 7 times by police, but to, quote, survey the damage following protests. And then during a roundtable, he started off by declaring everyone could take off their masks if they wanted. He then made this announcement.
So I'm committed to helping Kenosha rebuild. We all are. We will provide $1 million to the Kenosha law enforcement so that you have some extra money to go out and do what you have to do. You took it was a rough week, to put it mildly, and you've done it incredibly well. I'm also providing nearly $4 million to support these small businesses that I talked about today that got burned up, burned down. And we're going to be providing over $42 million to support public safety statewide, including direct support for law enforcement and funding for additional prosecutors.
I must have missed the protesters' calls for additional prosecutors. Trump's visit, of course, comes despite the mayor and governor asking the president to delay his trip for fear it would further increase tensions. But the president's response to that concern?
Well, it could also increase enthusiasm, and it could increase love and respect for our country.
It could, but it likely will not. Here's how the president responded when he was asked this morning if his statements and actions are helping heal racial division.
I think it's helping because I'm about law and order. And as far as the previous administration, take a look at Baltimore. What happened? Was it Freddie Gray? Take a look at Baltimore. Take a look at St. Louis. Take a look at Ferguson. Take a look at what happened. What they had was put what we're doing and put them to shame. I also saw the way they shot the young gentleman in the street. He was targeted. They targeted him. They shot him in the street, and then they were so happy, and he died. You don't mention that. You mentioned somebody sprayed paint at somebody from the other side. They shot a man in the street. They executed a man in the street. A religious man in the street. And you don't mention it. It's not even a story. You talk about other things. The press should be ashamed of themselves. I think the press is actually, the media is what's fueling this, more so than even Biden.
To be clear, no one is arguing that police violence only happened on Trump's watch. It's been happening forever. And here are just a few examples of the media not mentioning the man who was killed in Saturday's protests in Portland and has since been identified as 39-year-old Aaron Danielson. But it's interesting how differently Trump speaks about what happened to Danielson versus the 2 people who were shot and killed during protests in Kenosha last week. Here's what he had to say yesterday when a reporter asked him if he would condemn the actions of vigilantes like the man accused in those murders.
You saw the same tape as I saw, and he was trying to get away from them, I guess, it looks like, and he fell, and then they very violently attacked him. I guess he was in very big trouble. He would have been. He probably would have been killed, but it's under investigation.
I'm joined now by Ben Jealous. Ben's the former president of the NAACP, and Rahsaan Hall is the director of ACLU Massachusetts Racial Justice Program. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Hey, Ben, you just heard the president say his trip would help heal racial division. Can you make a case that it would?
I cannot. I've not seen a president in the history of this country. I don't know of any in the history of this country who has ever fanned the flames of racism and hatred the way that this president has. He appears to be doing it the same reason that George Wallace did it when he was governor, which is to, frankly, make it more likely that he'll win. He seems to have given up.
Well, you didn't have to go back to George Wallace. You can go back to Donald Trump in 2016. It worked in 2016. Why won't it work in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with, most presidents evolve in office, especially on matters of race and of national unity. There seems to be something transformative for any president about meeting so many people from so many places in this country. And they typically come away with an impression that we have more in common than we don't. This president's done just the opposite. As racist as his rhetoric was in 2016, as racist as his rhetoric was in 2008 and 2010, as he would attack President Obama over where he was born, he only seems to get more racist. He only seems to become a bigger fan of violence and of actually tearing this country apart. I guess that's what's remarkable about Donald Trump.
You know, Rahsaan, I want to talk a little bit about those who are buying what Donald Trump is selling. He was asked by Lauren Ingraham on Fox News about Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times. And here's the comparison that the president made.
The police are under siege because of things. They can do 10,000 great acts, which is what they do, and one bad apple or a choker. You know, a choker. They choke. Just like in a golf tournament, they miss a 3-foot.
You're not comparing it to golf because, of course, that's what the media.
I'm saying people choke.
Even Laura Ingraham couldn't bail him out, Rahsaan, there. What does it say that that comparison did not draw bipartisan outrage, either amongst elected officials or amongst real people?
I think it says that we are at a point of being numb, that we have continued to hear these types of outlandish statements from the so-called leader of the free world, and that we've developed, a position that it's expected, but that doesn't mean that it should not be critiqued. I think the other reality, though, is that there is still this countervailing narrative that exists in this country about the value and virtue of policing, and that it is overall a good institution when in certain communities it may be, but when you talk to the people who live in over-policed communities, particularly communities of color and poor communities, and especially black communities, the experience of being policed and policing is very different. And it's not the comparison that that the current occupant of the White House made of it being 1,000 good acts and 1 bad apple or a choker, but it's the overwhelming majority of the people who encounter police and encounter it in a either violent or disrespectful or harassing way.
Well, you know, Ben, when following up on what Rahsaan said, when the president talks law and order, it seems what he's saying in a polite way is, hey, you white people, we're going to protect you from those black and brown people, whether it's public safety, whether it's in housing. That's the message, is it not?
It is, and it's been a tried and true strategy with suburban white voters going back to the days of Richard Nixon. So the difference between Trump and Nixon is that Nixon could make a credible argument to the suburbs that he would be a calming and strong force. This president is just the opposite. He's Captain Chaos. And it seems that his strategy here is trying to inflame his base, to actually turn out more of the unlikely voters who are his hardcore supporters, rather than sort of tack to the middle and appeal, frankly, presidential. He appeals rather as a vigilante in chief, as opposed to a commander in chief.
I want to get back to the vigilante in chief in a second, Ben. But first, Rahsaan, you know, the conventional wisdom, I think, is very close to what Ben has to say when he used the term base and appealing to his base. But I would argue this law and order message has had a far broader impact. You've been involved in an effort, your organization, to get police reform through the most liberal democratic legislature in the United States of America. It is September 1st, and we're still waiting to hear what's happening behind closed doors. I mean, it seems to me the president's words are having a trickle-down impact on everybody well beyond his base. Is that unfair?
I don't know that it's unfair, but I do think it's a little inaccurate. I don't think that the Massachusetts legislature is being persuaded by the words of Donald Trump. I think there is this pervasive narrative that exists around policing, that it is ultimately and inherently good. And to the extent that Massachusetts is one of the most liberal legislatures in the country, I like to say we suffer from liberal exceptionalism because of our history with abolition and same-sex marriage and how we vote in presidential elections. But the reality is when you look at all of the indicators across racial lines, from gentrification, segregation, educational attainment, wealth, and mass incarceration and policing, we have some of the worst racial disparities. And so it's not necessarily what Trump is saying, but it's more endemic to the understanding that a broader base of society has about policing. But when you talk to to people, particularly in black communities, the understanding and experience of policing is very different. And that's why we've had so many troubles trying to not eliminate qualified immunity, but just reform qualified immunity so that victims of police violence can have their day in court. But the progressive Massachusetts legislature has been resistant to that.
You know, Ben, you mentioned a vigilante in chief, and obviously he came to the defense of a man who's already been charged with murdering 2 people, first-degree intentional homicide, it's called out there. You tweeted this on the 26th, that the RNC, Trump and Republicans, have been stoking fears of out-of-control mobs in American cities. They even honored the St. Louis couple who waved guns at Black Lives Matter protesters. Now 2 protesters at Kenosha have been murdered by an armed vigilante. Are you suggesting a direct connection between the promotion done by the president and his party and the actions in Wisconsin?
Absolutely. Where else could it have gone? Where else could it have gone? I spent my life in protest movements. You have to be extremely disciplined if you don't want to bear some responsibility for things going suddenly out of control. And we have the President of the United States bring to the RNC a couple that waved guns, pointed guns at Black Lives Matter protesters. And then we have a supporter of the president who was at one of his rallies earlier this year, shoot 2 of them the same week. I don't see how you can't draw a line between those points.
You know, gentlemen, I want to end with talking about the fight back in this. Trump has relentlessly used the largest bully pulpit in the world to put out his so-called law and order message. The Democrats have responded. In fact, here's Joe Biden with a smaller bully pulpit just yesterday.
I want to make it absolutely clear, something very clear about all of this. Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. Setting fires is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple.
You know, it seems to me, Ben, starting with you quickly if I can, that while Joe Biden is saying the right words, the force of his message is nowhere near as strong and powerful as Donald Trump's. Is that not so?
Ultimately, the powerful message for law and order, if you will, has to come from the people of this country. A real insistence on the enforcement of the U.S. Constitution, whose first purpose is justice and domestic tranquility, that it applied to all of us. This is fundamentally a protest movement about people's lives being sacrificed again and again, murdered again and again by the very officers who have sworn to respect and protect all of us. And so I think what you're seeing is the President of the United States on one side and generations of people of color, generations of white people who are fed up, standing up in the streets of this country and saying, enough is enough. It is time for us finally to be able to go to sleep at night and not worry that our unarmed neighbors are going to be killed by officers of the law. And so
Rahsaan, I'm sorry. Rahsaan, I only have 15 seconds. Is the Democratic response strong enough for you?
No, it's not. And they can be stronger. And this language around riots, I hearken back to Dr. King's word that riots are the language of the unheard. And then he questioned what it is America has failed to hear. Those are the very things that need to be addressed and that the Democratic Party or any party needs to be out front on to address these issues.
Ben Jealous, Rahsaan Hall, I thank you so much for your thoughts and your time. Thank you.
Thank you.